Hey, 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 apes, welcome back. And here is to another unit with Miss Hoskins. This time we're on water pollution, my favorite. Water pollution is 5 parts. First, we're going to talk about wastewater from humans and livestock, and then talk about the heavy metals and other chemicals that can pollute water. We'll have to definitely mention oil pollution, and then non-chemical water pollution, which is an interesting topic. And then we're going to wrap it all up with legislation. You guessed, water pollution laws. Besides sewage, you can also have heavy metal poisons and other chemicals that can get into the water system. So by the end of this, we need to be able to explain the sources of where those heavy metals come from and how they affect organisms, really. And also discuss the sources and effects of acid deposition and acid mine drainage. It's also part of it. And also explain how synthetic organic compounds can affect aquatic organisms. All right, most people know that pesticides are commonly found in the environment, right? And they are often surprised to learn that pharmaceutical drugs are also very common. All right, so the United States Geological Survey tested 139 streams across the U.S. for a variety of chemical contaminations. And here you can see in this figure that the data is the frequency of detection. So among these different types of chemicals that were present and detectable, and they were present in detectable levels, about 50% of all the streams contain antibiotics and reproductive hormones. 80% contain these non-prescription type of drugs, and 90% contain steroids. In most cases, the concentrations of these chemicals were quite low and currently are not thought to pose a risk really to the environment or to humans. But some chemicals, like hormones, they operate in a very low concentration inside of the tissues of organisms, and we really do have a poor understanding of the effects of these, kind of like we talked about in the Chesapeake Bay situation. Even the military makes compounds that can be harmful to the water. These perchlorates are harmful chemicals and they're used to make rocket fuel. Sometimes these contaminate also the soil, especially in regions of the world where the military rockets are manufactured, even if they're tested there or dismantled. These perchlorates come in many forms, actually. The U.S. Space Shuttle is just one good example, that it uses a rocket booster and it contains about 70% ammonium perchlorate. These perchlorates easily leach from contaminated soil into the groundwater, and they can persist there for a long time. Human exposure to these perchlorates comes primarily through the consumption of contaminated food and water that's being grown or it's been contaminated from the runoff. So in the human body, these perchlorates can affect the thyroid gland and reduce the production of hormones that are necessary for proper functioning in the human body. Industrial compounds are chemicals used in manufacturing. Unfortunately, it's used to be common for manufacturers in the U.S. to dispose of these industrial compounds basically directly into the body of water. But one of the most widely publicized consequences of this practice, it occurred in Ohio, and for more than 100 years, industries along the river basically dumped industrial waste, and it forms this slick of pollution along the surface, and it killed virtually every living thing inside of the river. And the problem became so bad that the river actually caught on fire and burned several times over decades. The fire on the river in 1969, it got national attention, and it led to like this movement of America, clean up America's waterways. Pcbs are one of the group of industrial compounds that manufacturers use. And usually this is used in the manufacturing of plastics and insulated electrical transformers. And PCBs have caused many environmental problems. Just the ingestion of them alone is lethal, and it's also carcinogenic, which means, cancer causing. The manufacturing of these PCBs, it ended in 1979, and so we no longer use this stuff in the United States because their long-term persistence is still present in the environment. One particular high-profile case involved General Electric, and it was in a General Electric manufacturing plant in New York State. It dumped over 590,000 kilograms of PCB into the Hudson River from a time period of like 1947 to 1977. In 2002, the EPA ruled that General Electric must pay for the dredging and removal of approximately 2 million cubic meters of PCB contaminated sediment from the Hudson River. And General Electric argued that, dredging should not occur because it would stir up the sediment and basically resuspend all the PCBs in the riverway, causing further issues. But EPA scientists disagreed, and in 2009, General Electric paid to have the river dredged. In 2013, the dredging was on schedule to be completed by 2015. Essentially, though, this story just demonstrates that it can just take decades and decades for science researchers to basically debate and come up with a solution to these really drastic problems. All right, just draw right there.
What?
Use your finger, draw right there. Okay, so these industrial compounds, these PCBs, are polychlorinated biethyls. While they have been a long concern for a long time, uneasiness is still growing over those. But in addition, they're no longer being manufactured. So this new thing is Pbdes. Those are polybromated dinyl ethers. I'm sorry. And basically, these are most commonly found in flame retardants, and they're added to a variety of items like in construction materials. People also put them in furniture. There's in electrical components. They're even in your clothes, and they make buildings and other stuff considerably less flammable than they would otherwise. And since the 90s, scientists have been detecting these Pbdes in some unexpected places like fish and birds, especially waterfowl, birds that are aquatic, and even now in human breast milk. So exposure to some types of these Pbdes have now been linked to brain damage, especially in children. In fact, the EU, the European Union, and several other countries and states like Washington and California have basically banned the manufacturing of all types of these PBDEs in their own state. But it's just proves that when we have one thing and it finally takes 50 years for us to realize that it's bad, we'll just invent a new one that is now, I don't know, worse, causing damages in our children's brains and stuff. So just there's lots of chemicals that we can consider water pollutants, heavy metals, acids, anything that's synthetic organic compounds. Legislation has set up some cleanup efforts, and some of the compounds are now very frequent in the environment, and the damage is already done. And so they're going to be persistent over a long period of time. And essentially what you have to know is that we all share the same water, and the water is the same for everybody. And so even though you might hear something that happens 2 states north of you, it all flows downstream. So